panza con mi señor. O sea que vayan a pedir metralletas y pasamontañas y no trajimos bastantes.
We would like to thank everybody for coming tonight. On behalf of NECHA, the Modern Languages Department, and several others, the Alliances for Democracy, and especially Dr. Acevedo, who made our flyers, and Marriott, who supplied the food, and Chicano Studies, who also helped out with the food. We'd like to thank you to coming to this presentation tonight on the situation that is going on in Chiapas, the Zapatista uprising. Tonight we are very, very fortunate to have with us Amando Avendano, who classifies himself as a lawyer by profession, a journalist by vocation, a politician by accident, and a governor in rebellion of the state of Chiapas. Right now I'll introduce Reverend Phil Wheaton, who's wrote this book right here that is on sale for this pamphlet right here. It's called Unmasking the Powers in Mexico. It's an excellent piece of literature. It's on sale for $5. If you guys would like to know more about the Zapatista paradigm and what that applies to not only Chiapas and Mexico, but the rest of the world, I encourage you guys to pick this book up. Once again, I'll turn this over to Reverend Phil Wheaton. Thank you.
They've asked me to do a little bit of a resume about the Zapatista revolution and to a little bit of an overview in English. I don't like to do this in terms of a history lesson, so if you want a history lesson, why, we provided a little bit of a recent history to you. So let me just lift up some things in each of these years that I think are highlighting. Will give you a little bit of the context of what this revolution, as our host here talked about, this is a very unique revolution, and we have to kind of understand what that means in terms of its uniqueness. The first uniqueness is that this revolution started on January 1st, 1994, which is precisely the same date when the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was imposed upon Mexico. Not by chance, because the Zapatista Indians know that the people who were promoting NAFTA wanted to get at their lands. They wanted to get at the indigenous lands. Why? Because in Chiapas there is 50% of the hydroelectric energy that provides 51% of all the hydroelectric energy for all of Mexico is in Chiapas. And most of the people in Chiapas don't have any electricity. This is a life and death struggle. So when they rose up in January 1st, 1994, it was in direct protest to this last stage of the attempt of the elite and the powerful to remove the indigenous from their lands. One of the things that has ironically saved the Zapatistas from the kind of total war mentality of the Mexican army is the coyuntura. It's the context. Because in that very year when the uprising occurred, two things happened. First, what I've just talked about, the initiation of NAFTA, which was worth billions of dollars to Wall Street. It was just starting, just as this war erupted, and it was the election year in Mexico. National elections, presidential elections. And here is this totally unexpected revolution occurring, and they're panic-stricken that this thing is going to mess up NAFTA and might cause serious problems for the primary party in power in Mexico. And both of those contexts provided the reason why after 12 or 13 days of the struggle at the beginning of January, they decided to call it off and to sit down and negotiate over peace with the Zapatistas. If this had happened in some other time, I'm convinced if it had happened in 1993 or 1985, then these pressures would not have been there, and they might have gone forward with their philosophy of total war against any group that rises up against the power structures in Mexico. So we have to keep this context down, and the massive losses in Mexico began to shake the whole structure of economics in all of Latin America. It shook the foundations not only of Mexico, but of every Latin American country, and began to shake the foundations of things in Wall Street. And that was at the same time that the Zapatistas occupied or went into 39 indigenous communities. And it's very important for the people here to understand that in the first occupation of the 7 cities in January, 1st of 1994 and in December when they occupied 39 villages and areas in indigenous villages. In both cases, not a shot was fired. This is not a struggle of arms. This is not an armed struggle. This is a revolution from below. It's a revolution in terms of vision. It's a revolution in terms of the truth. This is a revolution, the first revolution, as has been called, of the new millennium. On the 9th of February 1995, that the United States, in collaboration with the Mexican Army, began a war, a low-intensity warfare against the Zapatistas and against the indigenous communities that were sympathetic with the Zapatistas in the highlands of Chiapas. Because that's the way the United States does war. It's not the way the Mexican Army does war. The Mexican Army, starting with this uprising in January of 1994, were told by the Americans, you can't do it that way. You've got to do it in terms of low-intensity warfare, in which the United States is an expert and has been an expert ever since the time of the Vietnam conflict, now applied for the first time in Mexico. We've seen this time and time again in terms of the Contra War in Nicaragua, in terms of El Salvador, in terms of Guatemala, and now they're doing it in Mexico. So the answer to this uprising, this answer for the search of the indigenous communities for some kind of justice, is low-intensity warfare. And the Mexican Army now is tremendously financed, trained, advised by the Pentagon. The IMET funds, the International Military Education Funds, IMET funds, has been expanding tremendously since January of 1994. So the United States is directly behind this aggression of the Mexican Army. So it's not just the Mexican Army against the Zapatistas. This is an international war, or a inter-American war against them. And the Zapatistas answered with a new dialogue in March of 1995. That is, the answer of the Zapatistas is, let's sit down and try to find a peaceful solution to this problem. So over against the low-intensity warfare, and while the low-intensity warfare is going on, the Zapatistas are saying, let's sit down again and see if we can't work out something in terms of a peace agreement. And that led in October of 1995 to the beginning of the dialogue over indigenous rights in San Andrés La Rainzar, outside of San Cristobal de las Casas, in which for the first time the Mexican power structure was forced to sit down and negotiate with the poorest of the poor and the most marginalized of all Mexicans in terms of the rights not only of the Zapatistas, but the rights of all 11 million indigenous peoples in Mexico who speak 33 indigenous tongues and are located all over the country. And 40 other million Mexicans have a large percentage of Indian blood in them. So you're talking about Indio, Mexico Indio. By February 16th, 1996, moving into 1996, the first peace accords were signed. We had the chance, Zapatistas thought they had a chance of really pulling this thing off and coming to some kind of a peaceful agreement with the Mexican Army. That was the hope. But it was very clear that the Mexican government, once it received those peace accords, did not want to sign them, did not want to sign them into law, did not want to make them part of the Mexican Constitution. They were basically stalling. Sit down and talk with the Zapatistas, sign documents, as the United States government did with every single Native American tribe in this country, signed documents, signed treaties all over the place, and never kept one of those treaties. The same thing. Sign treaties, but never sign that into law, never be serious about what you're doing. So the Zapatistas found themselves in this box of not being able to move beyond this power structure. So they said, let's invite our friends in. Let's invite all the people around the world who have been listening to us because Subcomandante Marcos carried a submachine gun over one hand and a laptop computer over the other, and every message that went out, as Amando will tell you, went out over the email and over the net, and everyone in the world knew about it almost instantaneously. This is a war of information. And the Zapatistas have found the way to break this war of isolation of these groups and make it an international issue. So they knew that there were many of their friends, so they said, come on, let's have a gathering. Let's have an intercontinental encounter in Chiapas. And come all you folks, come and join us. And in late July, early August, this intercontinental, sometimes called an intergalactic meeting in Mexico took place, and 2,500 of us from all over the world, Spain, Italy, France, Germany, Japan, the Philippines, 40 countries were represented in this intercontinental encounter, and we were hosted by 5,000 Indians. And together about 10,000 people came and joined together, and the Indians said, we welcome you back to the Americas, not on your terms, but on our terms. This is our country, and we welcome you back into the new America that we have to build. Not you coming down here as conquistadores, but coming down here as our guests to share this new America that we want to create. And the response to this was a total rejection by the government of Ernesto Zedillo in terms of the reformed San Andres peace accords worked out by Cocopa. Those were reformed, and even though the Zapatistas were not happy with the Cocopa reforms, they still accepted them because something was better than nothing, a first step at least. And I think the government did not expect that, and they said, all right, even though we're not happy with many things in the Cocopa reform, we will accept them. And as soon as it got to the president of Mexico, he rejected it. And we move into 1997, and 1997 is the response of the Mexican government, which has been the escalation of violence against the indigenous communities. And this has been escalating all through 1997 up to the time of Actiel, the massacre at Actiel, which occurred on the 22nd of December, 1997. 45 people were slaughtered in cold blood. Women, children, men. And what was amazing about this little community of Actiel in the municipality of Chenalo is that this was a group that said, we're not into violence. We sympathize with the Zapatistas, but we're not into violence. And they carry guns. This is a pacific and nonviolent community called Las Abejas. And that was the community that they went after. Why then, if they were into nonviolence, even though they were Zapatista sympathizers, why would the paramilitary forces that attacked Actiel go after that kind of a community? And it was because they were an autonomous community. Autonomous communities, of which there are now 1,111 autonomous indigenous communities in the highlands of Chiapas. Because what that means is that the people who live in these communities, who represent 98% of the people in these communities, but these communities are controlled by a handful of priistas from outside. And they're saying we want autonomy so that we ourselves can be in charge of our own communities, so that democracy can work here on our terms, not on the terms of some outside powers, some outside party. When we went down to Actiel to look at the graves of the 45 people who had been murdered there, to stand on their graves, because they were buried right in the village of Actiel. We then went down to Hulo, where some 10,000 Indians who had been expelled from their communities were. And we wanted to go into that community. And this is basically what we used to call in Vietnam a strategic hamlet. That is a village that was set up by the military, and they forced all the people that they had driven out of their communities into Pulo. It was basically a militarized area. But when you try to go into Pulo, which is right off the highway, you can't go in because there's a rope across the road. A little rope. But next to that rope is a big sign. And it says, this is the autonomous community of Pulo. These refugees, These people who are under military pressure all the time have declared themselves a new autonomous community. It is this kind of rebellion in the face of the enemy that this system does not know what to do with. So we spent 3 or 4 hours talking with the people in Pulo, and then we came down to talk to the Bishop of Chiapas, to Samuel Ruiz, and we told him what we had seen in Actiel in Pulo. He said, you know, this is the 25th incident. We said, what? He said, Actiel was the 25th incident. That there were 24 other incidents leading up from September up to the time of the 22nd of December. And in each one of those incidents, between 1 and 9 persons were killed in every one of those incidents. Indians murdered time after time, leading up to Actiel. And then Actiel was the final explosion. But people hadn't heard about any of those other occupations and expulsions because they were small matters. But when it got to be 45 people, all of Mexico knew about it. We then went to the Human Rights Commission, and we talked to Padre Pablo Romo. He said, do you have a map of Mexico? We said, yes. He said, lay it out on the table. And we laid it out on the table. He said, where do you live? I said, well, Chiquit, Lo, Actiel, we named the towns that we've been in. And to get to those towns, you have to go up mountains and down mountain roads and around curves and so forth. He said, look at the map. They're on a straight line. This is a counterinsurgency practice, to drive a wedge through a much broader Zapatista territory, to drive a wedge through. This is classical warfare tactics, to drive a wedge, remove all the people, and then to begin to flank out against the 2 sides of that area that corridor that you opened up. This is a military operation, a systematic military operation, not some casual or coincidental events that have happened in all these communities. This is a plan. So I came down from that delegation with Peter Brown and others, came down to Mexico City, and I joined a march in Mexico City of Mexicans who were marching in protest of the Actiel massacre. I marched with 100,000 Mexicans. A march down La Reforma that lasted for 9 hours. This revolution in Chiapas is not some isolated event up there in the hills. This is something that is beginning to move all the Mexican people and to begin to shake people all over the world. Because we're basically saying we have to begin to build a new world, a new kind of economic system. And about that and what that means in terms of the people there, I'm very happy to turn the microphone over to Amando Avendano.
Yo soy Amado Avendaño Figueroa, abogado de profesión, periodista de oficio y político por accidente.
I am Amando Avendano Figueroa, a lawyer by profession, a journalist by trade, and a politician by accident.
Tengo el honor de saludar aquí al padre Loren y a Yuli, amigos que han estado luchando con nosotros allá. Wheaton ya lo hubiera dicho todo, ¿no?
It would seem that Wheaton has said everything already.
Pero solo abrió la puerta.
He just opened the door.
Hay tanto que decir sobre Chiapas que no alcanza esta tarde ni esta noche ni los días que siguen, ¿no? Porque además está produciendo a cada rato nuevos acontecimientos, a veces no soñados, ¿no?
There is so much to be said about Chiapas that it's not enough with this evening, this night, and all the days that follow, because events are taking place. Events that you couldn't even dream of are taking place always.
Aparte de que el cronista o el publicista del EZLN es el subcomandante insurgente Marcos.
Besides the fact that the publicist the media, the advertising person of the Zapatista Army, for National Liberation Army, is the subcomandante Marcos.
Este tipo como que tiene una habilidad extraordinaria para vender su lucha.
This guy has an extraordinary skill to sell his fight, his struggle.
Aquí tengo, por ejemplo, los originales de los penúltimos comunicados que ha enviado Marcos.
Here are the originals of the press releases delivered by Marcos, the ones second to the last press releases.
En la selva, como decía Wheaton, Chiapas produce más del 50% de la energía eléctrica que consume México.
As Phil Wheaton was saying, Chiapas produces in the jungle more than 50% of the hydroelectric energy, the electricity of Mexico.
Y sin embargo, una inmensa mayoría de campesinos carece de energía eléctrica.
And even that a great majority of peasants don't have electricity.
No obstante, el subcomandante se las ingenia con su computadora portátil de baterías y produce los comunicados. Aquí están.
And even though Subcomandante finds a way with his battery-operated laptop to produce his press releases, here they are.
Estos comunicados llegan allá a la casa y nos corresponde a nosotros difundirlas por el mundo.
These press releases come to our home there, and it's our duty to disseminate them all over the world.
Estos comunicados llegaron hace unos 6 días y el que lo lleva me dice, son las 11 de la mañana, y me dice, el comunicado se tiene que repartir a las 10 de la mañana.
These press releases arrived 6 days ago. The person who delivered them said, I get them at 11 in the morning, and he says, this has to be released at 10 in the morning.
Y yo le reclamo, ¿no? ¿Cómo? Si ya pasó una hora, por eso se córrele, porque se tiene que difundir ahora.
And I protest, I say, well, it's an hour ago, and he says, that's why you have to rush and print them right away. They have to be disseminated right away.
Entonces, así como el subcomandante, nosotros también ya aprendimos dónde hay que enviar los comunicados para que no los vaya a interferir el gobierno mexicano, y también los amigos periodistas ya se coludieron con nosotros para que estos comunicados, por ejemplo, hay empresas de difusión europeas que en 20 minutos desde que yo les entrego el comunicado lo están distribuyendo en Europa, ¿no? Con una habilidad extraordinaria.
So we have learned, as Subcomandante Marcos has learned, we have learned where in the media to go to be more efficient. So we know about press agencies, European press agencies, that 20 minutes after we give them these press releases, they have them all over the world.
Esta falta de energía eléctrica del gobierno mexicano hacia los campesinos nos ha protegido.
This lack of electricity produced by the government and affecting the peasants has really protected us.
Porque como no hay energía eléctrica, no hay televisión y por lo tanto no hay la incidencia publicitaria del gobierno, entonces estamos a salvo, no nos perjudica la televisión.
Since there is no electricity, there is no TV, so the government propaganda cannot affect us. We are saved from that.
Como les decía, nosotros en Chiapas producimos más del 50% de la energía eléctrica que consume todo el país.
So we produce in Chiapas more than 50% of the electricity consumed by the whole country.
Y para generar esa energía eléctrica, se sacrificó al campesino chiapaneco, porque las mejores tierras agrícolas quedaron inundadas. Malpaso, La Angostura, Chicoacén, grandes presas donde los campesinos sembraban maíz, frijol y otras verduras, quedaron bajo el agua y el gobierno, aunque indemnizó en algunas ocasiones, no creó otra fuente de producción, otra fuente de trabajo para que los campesinos tuvieran permanentemente de qué comer.
So to create these sources of electricity, the peasants have suffered a great deal because the government has these masses of water. This water has inundated, has flooded areas that were devoted to cultivate, to grow corn, frijoles, and vegetables, areas of like Malpaso, Chicoacén, and La Angostura. And even when the government paid some compensation in those cases, they didn't create a source of jobs or for the peasants there.
La idea que nos expone Wheaton de que coincidió la entrada en vigencia del TLC, del NAFTA, con la explosión revolucionaria en Chiapas, tuvo mucho que ver con el NAFTA respecto de los campesinos.
What Phil Wheaton was talking about, this coincidence of NAFTA taking place at the same time of the Chiapas uprising, is connected to the point of view of and the approach of peasants to these issues.
Algunos de ustedes conocen, por ejemplo, la revolución de principio de siglo, en donde Emiliano Zapata peleaba que le devolvieran las tierras porque los campesinos sin tierra se mueren de hambre. Allí producen maíz, allí producen frijoles, y entonces si les quitas la tierra se quedan en la calle, se mueren de hambre.
Some of you have heard of the revolution at the beginning of the century when Emiliano Zapata was fighting for the land to be returned to the peasants because they need the land to survive as a source of food and subsistence.
Entonces tiene razón Wheaton cuando concatena las condiciones que pusieron los neoliberales, los banqueros usureros norteamericanos, de que desapareciera el ejido mexicano. Carlos Salinas de Gortari suprimió el artículo 27 constitucional, que es el que garantiza la tenencia de la tierra en México.
And so Phil Wheaton was right when he was alluding to the policies of neoliberalism. Carlos Salinas, regarding the disappearance or the elimination of the ejidos of communal lands, Carlos Salinas de Gortari suppressed the Article 27 of our Constitution about the land for the peasants.
Entonces yo pienso que por instinto de supervivencia, los campesinos y más los indígenas, al ver que estaban suprimiendo el artículo 27, definitivamente se iban a quedar sin tierras, porque las tierras ya se pueden vender, se pueden embargar, se pueden piñorar, y entonces era un peligro grave para la supervivencia de los campesinos al quedarse sin alguna parcela.
So the survival instinct of of the peasants got into, and especially the indigenous people got into action there, they realized that by the suppression of this, elimination of this article in the Constitution, their lands could be sold, and they were in great danger of not having any resources.
Pero además de eliminar el artículo 27 constitucional, que ya era un peligro para los indígenas, el gobierno también comenzó a eliminar a todos aquellos que ayudaran a los indígenas.
So besides eliminating, getting rid of Article 27 of the Constitution, which was very dangerous to the native people, they also started to eliminate everybody who helped the native people.
A los mexicanos que están ayudando a los indígenas, pues no los pueden correr del país.
So the Mexicans that are helping the native people cannot be expelled from the country.
Pero aquellos como el padre Loren, por ejemplo, pues fácilmente lo encontraron en la calle, lo subieron a una camioneta y lo trajeron a dejar de este lado de la frontera. Muy fácil.
So for people like, for instance, Father Lauren, it was very easy to find him in the street, walking in the street, put him in a truck, in a pickup truck, and bring him to this side of the border. Very easy.
Y como el padre Loren, a otros 5 sacerdotes, independientemente de todos los amigos europeos que están ayudando a los campesinos. Aquí nomás en la frontera encontramos a Peter Brown, un profesor que ya hizo una escuela en Oventic, cerca de la Reinsar, que también fue expulsado, y a los simpatizantes de la idea de Oventic, de la escuela, también, que son mexicanos, los están amenazando para que no eduquen de manera independiente a los indígenas. Y Oventic es un punto clave, pues, porque ahí está la comandancia del Aguascalientes de los Altos de Chiapas.
Okay, so besides the 5 priests that they also expelled from the country, they expelled many other people who have been helping us. We found Peter Brown in the border, the one who created the school of Oventic nearby La Ranza.
La Reinsar.
La Reinsar. He's a professor, he's a teacher, and people like him who want to follow this type of example, who want to educate in an independent way, have been, the peasants have been threatened, especially because in the place in Oventic, the comandancia, the headquarters of Aguascalientes, of Aguascalientes is established nearby the school of Aventic.
Y a raíz de esto, el gobierno no encuentra cómo quitarse de encima el problema zapatista, porque no es tanto resolver un problema interno, sino quedar bien con los usureros, los banqueros extranjeros que tienen intereses en México.
So the government doesn't know how to get rid of this Zapatista problem, because it's also what they have to do is to be in good terms with the bankers, the usurers who have interests, monetary interests in Mexico.
De esta manera, el gobierno mexicano ha organizado una guerra de baja intensidad.
So the Mexican government has launched a low-intensity war.
Han creado a grupos paramilitares.
They have created paramilitary groups.
De esta manera, el gobierno, el ejército mexicano, evita que le salpiquen de sangre.
In this way, the Mexican army avoids to be splashed with the blood of the people.
De esta manera, el trabajo sucio de eliminar indígenas lo hacen grupos paramilitares.
So this is the way in which the dirty work of eliminating the indigenous people is being carried on by paramilitary groups.